Okay, I'm present and accounted for, I think.
Yes, you are. Welcome.
Things are a little bit confusing for one reason or another right now, but let us continue. I guess we got everybody here, do we? Looks like it. Okay, Laura, I see the invitation, but don't see her. Laura, you with us, are you?
Yep. I'm here.
Okay. All right. It's 1:02. Let's call the meeting to order and get going here. Been a little bit enough confusing before the start, and it'll probably promptly go downhill. Anybody have anything they want to add or take away from the agenda? Okay, I'm going to take the agenda as approved. How about the minutes for the last meeting, August 20th? Anybody want to add or subtract from that?
They look good to me.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'm not going to ask for a vote. I'll just indicate that they've been approved. I don't see any public here. Hang on a second. Okay, no public comments. Let's go on from there to the unfinished business. First item on the unfinished business is the status report. That's been updated from what happened at the last meeting. I just got a couple of comments that I want to make. And this also, Camilla, involves the bylaws work group. When we're finished today, we should have discussed everything that was on the bylaws work group summary that came to us. The color coding indicates that everything is pretty well gone past us one way or another, except for the two items that are on the agenda in the next couple of minutes or so. And those are the two uncolor coded items in the action required list. And then there's also, we have additional items that have been added that didn't come to us from the summary work of the work group. And they're on the agenda for today as well. The way I look at the status is that we're going to very quickly, not necessarily today, maybe not even until the conclusion of the next meeting that we have scheduled on the 17th, and we'll have to see from there. We're going to very soon, we should be to the point where we've covered everything, and we have either gone back to the work group, or we can go back to the work group with everything and in a package, so to speak, that this is what we've done. And it's before the work group for their consideration as to go forward. The one item that is not at the work group as such is at our attorney for review on the consideration of the ARC committee provision that's in the bylaws. But other than that, we're coming very close to the point where we have done everything that we think we can do. And I'm not sure that perhaps the work group wants to look at these things that are already there and more as they come to it, or perhaps a month from now, a complete package is in front of the work group, and the work group would start with a complete package rather than, for example, piecemeal. That's a consideration that I offer for both the committee to think about, as well as Camilla, any communications you made. I know you sent a message to Doug Parks about there being items for the work group to review. What I'm trying to say is we could be at a point let's say a month from now, in which there is a complete package for the work group to review.
Jim, I think, if I might interrupt you right there for just a minute, I think that it might be better that we put this all together, and then I will work with Doug at convening a meeting of the work group again. Because,
Okay.
as you know, this summer we've had people away. We've had, I think, at least 2 of our board members have had parents die. And we're right in the middle, smack dab in the middle of this trial, and that is consuming a tremendous amount of all of our time. And I would say that some of the people to whom I have distributed responsibilities for work have not been timely in getting this back to me. I'm still thinking about Tom Janasek and the Marine thing. I haven't heard anything from him, and every time I see him, I said, are you going to get this back to me? Are you going to get this back to me? And that's been at least several months. So I guess I'll have to go to his house and beat on his door, because that might work. But nonetheless, I don't want to postpone this. But I think too, Jim, is it okay just to mention what you and I were previously talking about?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Jim was gracious enough to take a call from me when we were in the hearing over in Snow Hill this week, which I'm sure that you all are familiar with. The judge commented on specific portions of our bylaws, particularly that having to do with who was an owner of record. And if you're part of an LLC, were you an owner of record, therefore eligible to run for the board? And I think it's caused all of us on the board to pause and think, the last time the bylaws were fully updated prior to the work we're doing now was in 2008. And is it time to have our council review these bylaws again? And if so, how are we going to merge that into the priorities of the work group and what we're doing here? Is that a loaded question? I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I believe so. I don't know that we can consider a question of what's the meaning of an owner of record. We certainly can do that. I don't know. What other thoughts may be from the rest of the committee on something like that?
And that was just one example.
Yeah. Well, one thing that does occur to me is it may be a little bit premature to do too much thinking about such questions before the conclusion of this trial and see what comes out of it. I understand the concern about the hearing comments of the judge, but I'm a little concerned that we don't get too far ahead of things before the trial itself is concluded, and there is some decision on the issues before the court.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Jim. And I might also tell the other 2 members of the court that during these proceedings, Jim was very gracious in taking my calls about what is the meaning of this and what does this mean. And so he was able to get me ready for that testimony by always being on top of what is in our bylaws.
Okay, well, any committee comments on what we've just had here?
I just think we should wait for the judge and see what they recommend, and then we'll go back if there's problems, address them and fix them.
Okay.
Agreed.
Keith, I saw you kind of nodding your head.
No, I agree. It's potentially the outcome of this is going to result in some things that we need to change or tweak. We'll have to wait and see how it falls out. And it's probably a valid concern that the legalities of some of the language that is embedded in the bylaws may need to be looked at to make sure that Maryland law hasn't changed, some other aspect of law has not been changed or updated since then that would require us to make similar changes to our documents, which, by the way, is just a good question in general, right? Because is there even a mechanism in place by which maybe the lawyer that we have on retainer would become aware of some element of HOA law, related law, that then we would need to be made aware of and make sure that we incorporate, or somebody looks at our bylaws? Is there some sort of mechanism in place for that currently?
I personally don't know, but I know that there are various summaries that come out regarding changes in laws, and I would think, and don't know, that our association counsel would be on the distribution and quite aware of that kind of thing. But I don't know that for a fact. Camilla, you may have a
No,
better.
I don't want to tell you something that's not true. So I am going to put that on my list of questions to ask Jeremy. Keith, that's an excellent point. Excellent point.
It would make sense if he was up to it, and then that was part of his responsibilities that we're paying him for, is to keep updated himself also on any changes. And then to pass that information along to the board, which then would, charge this committee with making sure we have corrected, or even just, to make sure that we're staying updated. My experience with bylaws is we have to review them every 3 years, so doesn't mean you have to make changes every 3 years, but you have to at least look at it and make sure you're still current and everything. So, I would think that could be something that the lawyer also does too, is just to make sure things are up to date, to allow us time to be able to go through the process of correcting things, because then no matter what, if we have to make corrections, we got to take it to the whole membership for final approval, right? Correct? I mean, if we're changing the bylaws,
Yep.
so
That's a referendum.
so it takes time. It's not something that can just, oh, hey, you need to fix this and it's done. So
These Jim, these summaries that you mentioned, is this something that's published by the state attorney general? Where do these summaries come from?
No, I can't say specifically on that. I have seen various summaries, but the exact sources I can't identify offhand.
Because I would think, at an absolute minimum, if because of his position as an attorney or a property related attorney, if he gets such summaries potentially related to HOA governance and laws, that at a minimum, he should forward those summaries to this committee. And at an absolute minimum, we should see them and read them. I mean, I think he should, because he's a lawyer. We're not trained attorneys. But if for some reason he doesn't, whatever, at a minimum, we should get those so that we can be aware and talk about it and potentially bring to the board's attention something that we read that maybe we think requires some action.
Okay, well, I guess, Camilla, you indicated you were going to follow up on that kind of thing. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Jim.
Okay. Just before we move on, just one comment though on the subject or the topic of owner of record and what the owner of record means. That in and of itself is not an HOA specific item. That's a property law item, and I did have a chance to go back and look at the bylaws of the association, again going back to a 1982 comprehensive revision of the bylaws, that owner of record language is currently in the bylaws has been there for almost 40 years now. And of course, I don't know what it was before 1982, what may have been the requirement at that point in time, probably somewhat different because not the original directors were not necessarily property owners within the association. In fact, they probably were not, as a matter of fact. At any rate, to kind of conclude this, what we'll plan on doing is proceeding with what we're going down our list of provisions we're looking at and making our decisions as to going forward, and really being prepared to have a complete package of where we are and what we're proposing, or where we have gone back to the work group for further guidance as may be needed. Having that really completed, perhaps in the next couple of meetings, and to the work group, perhaps sometime in October. I'm not trying to set an exact date, but certainly in the next 2 to 3 meetings, we should be at that point. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's continue on. I think that's enough for the status review sheet. It'll be updated after our meeting and available again. But let's continue on from there. Let me make sure I'm not missing something here. Okay. Next item on the agenda, as I look around for my agenda, is the eligibility to vote, or eligible to vote question. At the last minute, I sent around a revision to what we had, what I had sent earlier several days ago with the meeting materials packet. And what Josh has up here is the most recent version that was sent this morning. To kind of repeat what I had in the email that this came around with, was that I probably kind of took the easy way out and saw that there was not only an eligible to vote reference, but an eligibility to vote, and composed a section 1.1 with 1.11, which is a definitions, to include both terms. And I decided, it had been kind of weighing on my mind at the last minute, that really wasn't the way to go. And there are 2 locations within the bylaws that use the term eligibility to vote. The rest of the references are eligible to vote, referring to eligible to vote. And the definition is simply eligible to vote refers to a member who meets the voting requirements in section 301C. I'll get to that in a minute. What I've done is, in the 2 eligibility to vote references, 303C and whatever it is here, I'm trying to read it, 3.05, I revised those, as you see there, to pick up the term eligible to vote. And that's, for that reason, the 1.11 just simply refers to eligible to vote. Now, along with that, there are 2 other locations. One is in 4.07A and the other is in 5.02A, where I'm looking, okay, it's missing a little bit in the first reference, the 407A. It did at one point in time, or does now, I'm sorry, at the end, members eligible to cast a vote. that would be changed only to read members eligible to vote rather than eligible to cast a vote. And then the next one down is the same kind of thing. I'm not sure what that, it's changed to eligible to vote from, let me look at that provision real quick.
You want the bylaws up, Jim? I've got that too.
Okay, if you want to, go ahead. We're looking at
What section?
5.02A. Okay. Well, I'm not sure why I've got that there. Something doesn't add up right here, folks. I've got eligible to vote. Hang on a second. Oh, okay. It already has. I didn't fully read through what I was doing. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. The original, we had originally intended to add under section 301C to that provision. That is not necessary with the 1.11 definition. So that part of the proposal can come out. Can you go back to that not attachment, but the eligible to vote? Yeah, that where I had under 502A eligibility, that can come out entirely off of that page because I was not careful about what I was looking at and revising on this attachment. And that's what happens, I guess, when you try to do things at the last minute, not sufficient thinking about or reviewing what you're doing. The next part of this is where the revised 301C and add a section 301D. 301C now picks up I'm going to call it two conditions. And this is one I would like for some discussion or consideration of, because I'm a little bit hesitant. Let me put it that way. It's the payment of the annual charge is a prerequisite. And then it goes on to say the voting rights of a member may be suspended because of a DR violation, may be suspended by the board. And it makes reference to another section that picks that information up. My hesitancy in using this provision this way, and it's the one that's referenced in the 1.11 definition. That's where you find out what makes you eligible to vote. What we're looking at here, that combines what I call a positive and a negative. The positive action is that you've got to pay your annual charge to be eligible to vote. The negative is that you've got to avoid having done something on your property that the board of directors finds sufficient to revoke your eligibility to vote. So you've got, and this is my terminology, my expression, you have in one provision a positive action that a member can take, combined with a negative in the sense that a member has to avoid having done something which is not defined in detail here. That's a little bit of my hesitance with the proposed C. Now, the proposed D simply separates out this 35 days element, which has been a confusion to a degree in the past, and that was the real intention was to keep separate, to keep these things from all being run together, and particularly the 35-day eligibility provision in there, and avoiding a confusion there, and particularly with regard to the eligibility of a candidate. So anyway, any comments on this entire proposal here? One part of the proposal is defining what is eligible to vote means, and then a minor change here and there into would be now 3 provisions, 2 on the eligibility to vote being converted to eligible to vote, and the one remaining one deleting the cast, eligible to cast the vote, changing that provision in particular, as well as the provision in 301 C and D. Hopefully I haven't confused everybody, and I want to open this up for discussion as to what we think about this proposal. Do we need to add it to the next meeting? Probably.
I got
I
a
kind
thought.
of think so.
Go ahead,
I kind
Keith.
of think so, Jim, because I think that this is the crux of the matter that I need to go back to the board and to our attorney with to get these updates.
Keith, go ahead. You were going to say something, Keith.
So initially, the approach here for C was to divide it, to divide the language up into a new paragraph D.
Yeah.
And what's in D now is that no member may vote if blah, 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 blah.
Right.
It's saying that in the past, there's been an issue, and it's thought that if it's separated into a separate paragraph, that it might provide more clarity. And if that's the case, then I would say that the sentence that says the voting rights of a member may be suspended during any period should also be separated out into a separate paragraph. Because it's in the same category as D. It's saying that a member can't vote for this reason. So it almost, for consistency purposes, it almost seems like we need two new subparagraphs. C would be the first sentence. D would be the second, and a new one, E, would be the third. They would just all be separated out. And then, if that were the case, would that solve your concern about having the positive and negative combined into one?
Okay, well, it would. Keith, can you, I'm sorry, not Keith. Josh, can you move the, what's on the screen down so we can see? Okay. What that would then entail, and we had basically started out this way in the first place, having to add on at the end section 301C and 301D, because those two together are what are required to, the conditions that are required to be able to be eligible to vote. C is the payment of the C would be, the payment of the annual charge, and then D is the avoidance of having had your vote suspended by the board.
Well, there's actually 3 things there. There's payment of the annual charge. There is suspension of voting rights because you're in violation of the DRs. And then there is not being able to vote because you didn't pay in a timely manner. So it's really 3 things being discussed there. And that's what I'm suggesting is maybe there's another new paragraph, Echo. So you have Charlie, Delta, and Echo, and you just divide all 3 up into their own separate subparagraphs.
Okay, I don't have any problem with that.
I would agree with separating them out.
Okay.
I
Bob,
would agree with separating, but I'm still a little bit confused. Does the 35-day rule also apply to declaration of restrictions?
no.
But see, yeah, see that,
So if that's
that
taken
is
care of the day of the
confusing.
election, I can still vote.
Right. I was confused about that too, because is it saying that if you paid your dues, but then 2 days before the end of the elections, you're in violation to a declaration, does that mean before they go to count, your vote doesn't count then?
No,
Or is it just within that, prior to that 35 days, you can't have any violation?
the latter, Lisa.
I agree with that. The 35 days is a cutoff. Whatever happens, would have to happen before the 35 days.
So I think the language that's in D needs to be reworded. And I think it needs to be, this is my opinion, that it needs to be, C needs to be payment of the annual charge is a prerequisite to vote.
Right.
The new D needs to be reworded version of no member may vote 35 days prior. And then the new echo would be your voting rights could also be suspended for violation of DRs. That way, the payment of the annual charge and the 35-day rule are close to each other, and appear to be linked. But I think D needs to be reworded. So it says payment of the annual charge, prerequisite to vote. And then the next paragraph, the new D would say the annual charge and any assessed interest levied by the association must be paid 35 days prior to the voting deadline. In other words, the way it's worded now is in the negative, and it should be reworded to be a positive action. So instead of starting out with if you don't, it starts out with you should do this or you shall do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So C would say payment of the annual charge, ... is a prerequisite to the right to vote. D would say such annual charge, including any assessed interest levied by the association, must be paid prior 35 days prior to the voting deadline in order to vote. And then the new echo would say, and the vote also, or in addition, the voting rights of a member may be suspended during any period, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with that basic wording? Let me ask that question first. Okay.
Yes, except for, Keith, can you clarify what you just said though about the last part about the declarations one? That, did you say that at any time they could be restricted from voting? But I thought they just said that I think we need to be clear about when that could take effect. Is it after we've hit that 35 days? Can that still affect your voting rights, or up until the 35 days and you've paid your dues?
So that's why I think that we need to reorder these, because suspension of voting rights due to DR violation is a separate issue from not paying your annual charge.
Right.
Or not paying it in a timely manner. Well, paying the annual charge and paying it in a timely manner, those are two related issues. Additionally, separately, your voting rights may be suspended if you're in violation of the DRs. And all I can go by is it says here during any period. So I don't know if that means at any time.
Right. I think that, to me, that's my sticking point, is the clarity on the timeline for the DRs then violations, because maybe I've paid up everything and I didn't realize I had violated something, and then 14 days before, whenever, would that affect my ability to vote? Or because it didn't happen prior to that 35 days, am I still okay?
One of the problems we have in trying to do something with this provision in particular is that the wording that's being used is almost identical or extracted from the Declaration of Restrictions, which is where this provision starts at. And for us to try to modify it is problematic. Now, a little bit more detail or background with regard to it. What is being referred to here is a violation. Let's call it a CPI inspection violation, whatever may be the case. Somebody's built a shed and not got the proper permits, and the violation's been written up, and it goes through the process and makes its way. Actually, this should go now from our committee to the general manager to the attorney, but there's also a provision in our applicable resolution that the information regarding the violation would go to the board of directors for them to act on it if the board of directors sees fit to invoke the DR provision regarding suspending the right to vote. So it had this provision in order to be literally enacted, not enacted, but acted on, has to go to the board of directors, and the board of directors have to first vote for it to be a continuing violation, and then also indicate that this vote is suspended because of it. So it's not something that can happen or should not be able to happen. There's provisions for notice in the process of a violation that the owner is going to have notice of what's going on. So it should not be anything that is unknown happening to the owner that they're in danger of a vote being suspended.
So what you're saying then is the way it's worded that a member may be suspended during any period the member is in continuing violation.
That's
so
correct.
If they just happen to get their first notice saying, hey, we need you to fix, XYZ, that's not considered a continuing violation because they haven't had time to rectify that yet. And maybe they would and get it done and everything's back to order.
Right. I think that's actually the point.
You're talking then in continuing violation is about the ones who are not fixing and have been notified many times, right? Is that the part that would cause somebody to be ineligible to vote because they got?
So remember when we did a revision to the bylaws about how CPI violations were going to be handled, part of that was 30-day official notice, right? So the very first official contact with the property owner would be in writing, would officially notify them that there's a DR problem, and they would have 30 days to resolve it or to provide a path forward to resolving it, right? So let's say on day 35, you paid your dues, and on day minus 34 from the election, you receive a letter in the mail saying you're in violation of the DR. Well, you have 30 days to do something about that before it's going to go to the board and be adjudicated in some other fashion. So really, there's almost no way that a DR violation, first notice DR violation, is going to impact this 35-day rule. You would have to be somebody who's a chronic violator. Who's
probably already been deemed in violation.
Correct.
Prior to this 35 days anyway.
Correct.
And most likely, maybe they wouldn't even have paid their dues, if they're not fixing things. So.
And if you go to 513 Echo, I pulled it up on my screen. It provides just a wee bit more at the end. It's almost word for word from 513 Echo, but the very last sentence of 513 Echo says, after the existence of the violation has been declared by the board. So that means you get your 30-day letter,
Mhm.
you've blown it off, now you've taken no action, and the board's not going to convene a special meeting just to hear your one complaint, right? So it would be on the next scheduled board meeting, and then they would have to declare it. So again, the odds of a first time notice person being hampered by this 35-day rule, I think is almost non-existent.
Yeah, I agree. That's a pretty good summary of the practicalities of the situation. It's unlikely to a DR violation eligibility is going to have any particular impact relative to the 35 days. Let's put it that way.
So now that I've read 513 Echo, we're kind of back to that what we talked about before, where we duplicate language in different sections of the bylaws. So if this is almost a direct quote out of 513 Echo, which means in the future, if for some reason we need to change 513 Echo, we would have to come back here and change this as well. So I also recommend that we simplify this sentence and just say something like, the voting rights of a member may also be suspended in accordance with 513 Echo. And then people would have to go to 513 Echo and read it.
That makes sense.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me draw a line at suspended, and then in accordance with section. Okay. All right. What we'll be doing is we'll separate out C, the payment, D, what's listed on here is D. D, we would take out the voting rights, so the suspension voting rights, and change the wording and make that Echo and move D up. Now, what I've made a few marks on my copy here as to how to reword what's shown here as D, the 35 days provision. What I'd like to do, and I do this typically anyway, I'll go back to the video, and Keith, what I'll do is take the words that you use there and write them out as a proposal for what will be a new D.
Okay.
And looking back up here, what we'll have to have up in 1.11 is 301C, D, and E. What defines eligible to vote. And I think the rest of this we've gone through. I mentioned that the part it's going to have to be deleted. The 502A it does not have to be changed based on what we're talking about here. What I will do is rewrite this based on our discussion, and I'll send it around again to make sure that I've got the basic correct wording for the 35 days provision, as well as the suspended vote on the declaration of restrictions. I'll get that done and send it around, and so everybody can make sure that this is the kind of words we agreed to, rather than try to sit here right now and write out the exact words we want in, and we can all take a look at it in writing, and then change as we may think necessary. Okay, is there any other? Do we have covered this reasonably well enough at this point?
One question, the 501C, there's a typo there right after it says our valid proxies are delivered, or the AE. Is that a typo?
Which one are we looking at now, Bob?
We're looking at the first one. The secretary shall confirm members eligible to vote and valid proxies are, I think, being delivered to.
It says AE.
There's a typo there, that's all.
Confirm that members eligible to vote. Oh, okay, I see.
You see it? You may as well fix it while you're at it.
I got it.
Good.
I don't remember if I did a spell check on the document or not. I don't know what, I don't know if AE comes up in there or not. Okay, I see it.
Okay.
That'll avoid some future confusion. Okay, anything else on this one?
Nope.
All right, let's keep going here then. I think we're gonna probably lose Camilla here in a few minutes. Next item up is the 404C notice of meetings. Can you get that up? Sorry, up. Thanks, Josh. We had pretty well talked about this, and what was left was to put some words down on paper for us to look at this meeting. The first one is the 404B. We determined we wanted to change provided to designated by the member for this purpose. This deals with the address electronically or mail that the member wants notices to be sent to. It would be more appropriate to indicate that the address was designated by the member for this purpose. Any further comment on that? We did, as I said, I think we pretty well agreed to that the last meeting. Any further comment?
None.
Okay. Now, the 404C is an add a new C to read as follows. And this is new wording. We talked about this, but as a new proposed new section, this is the wording that I came up with from our discussion. And I'll just go ahead and take the time to read it. Single notice addressed to indicate that it is to all members shall be sent to members who hold property in common ownership. Notice to members shall be sent without regard to the eligibility. Oh, how did I do that? I have to change that somehow. Without regard to being eligible to vote. How's that sound?
So I think this needs to be reworded.
Okay.
I actually drafted a slightly different version. So first of all, and correct me, this is my understanding of when we briefly talked about it last time. My understanding from last time was that the single notice issue is, regardless of how many people are in the trust or in the LLC or whatever, we send it to one address, and then that address is then responsible for duplicating it or forwarding on to whoever the other involved parties are. Is that correct?
That's a good summary. Yes.
Okay. So here's the way I reworded it. A single notice addressed to indicate it is to all members shall be sent to the address designated above. Period. It is the responsibility of the recipient to forward such notice as necessary to other members who hold property in common with the recipient. Period. Notice to all members shall be sent without regard to the eligibility to vote. So in other words, it says, we're going to send a single notice. We're going to send it to this address you designated, that the owner of the property designated as the official address, which is what B is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the notice, it's going to make clear that the recipient is responsible for then distributing it to other property, other people who have an interest, a financial interest in that property.
Okay. The only thing I would change is at the end, the eligibility to vote has to be changed without regard to being eligible to vote, perhaps would be.
So I left that sentence there as you had it.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I can change the eligibility to vote to correspond to our change, similar to what we talked about in the sections 3.05, 303, whatever it was, but change the eligibility to vote part. Okay, I don't have any, that's a good phrasing, good way to express what's really intended here. Does anybody have any further comments on that? I fully support that that change to the provision.
No, I think it makes it clear. And that's what we're all about, is trying to make it as clear as possible so nobody can say they didn't get the information. You know, you send it out to the designated address, then and there's more than one person who might be interested in that information. It's now up to that main address recipient to get it out to the others. So.
Yeah, and that's the clear intention of the single notice. I'm going to go back over the history of why a proposal to pick up this provision in the bylaws came about, or why it actually came about in the charter initially. But this fully indicates what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, Keith, I'll do the same thing that I talked about on the earlier one we just went past. I'll take the wording off of the video and rewrite this particular proposal and send it back around with the one previously we talked about, so that we can all again see it in writing and decide that is or is not what we want to go forward with, and go from there on that one.
Jim, I just emailed you my draft write-up with the language on there, so you should get it in your inbox here pretty soon.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Anything further on this one?
No.
All right, let's continue moving right along. I got my agenda here somewhere. By now we're into the.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
pursuant to our earlier conversation, I need to leave for my son's house, and I will watch the end of this. And thank you very much for a good meeting and getting some good things done.
Well, we're trying.
Yes.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Miss Camilla.
Have a happy
before
Labor
you
Day,
go-
everyone.
Miss Camilla,
Again.
Yes.
before you go, it just popped into my head, but for the upcoming board meeting on the 15th, do you guys have the second reading of our thing that we need done on that agenda?
Yeah, there's a second reading that's necessary.
For the bylaws.
C04.
Be done. Yes.
So C04.
Yeah, it hasn't had the second reading done. You did one 2 months ago, but then the meeting after that when it wasn't added. So it still needs a
No,
second.
I am unaware, so I need to put on the agenda the second reading of C04.
Yeah,
Yes.
I will take care
Please.
of that, and thank you for bringing that to my attention.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Alrighty. Okay.
All
Have a
right.
happy Labor Day, everyone.
All right,
Okay.
you too. Have fun.
Okay. Take care.
All right, unfinished, I'm sorry, not unfinished, new business.
Okay.
The three items on new business, we're actually now into three suggestions regarding changes to the bylaws, two of which came from outside the committee. The third one is brand new. And it's something that I'm bringing to the committee to consider. The first one is the suggestion that associate members of the association be considered for committee membership. Josh, can you bring up section 10 of the bylaws?
Hey, Jim,
Yeah,
but before we go there, so you originally sent out some language, eligibility to vote, that had to do with 1.11, 3.01, and 4.07. And then you just yesterday or today provided a new write-up, but I don't think we talked about 4.07. And it's in that same subject matter. 4.07 alpha.
yeah, that where that, let me get something out here. On the bylaws work group summary, I'm going to read from what's there. The current language denotes a condition, quote, eligible to cast a vote and should be defined explicitly. And it's proposed to change the it's actually the fourth sentence, I believe. Each member signing the petition must be eligible to vote as referenced in 301C when the petition is filed.
Right. So in that paragraph, in that same paragraph, the sentence, two sentences before that, it says the petition must be in a format prescribed by a resolution adopted by the board of directors and signed by members eligible to cast a vote. And then two sentences later, it says each member signing the petition must be eligible to vote when the petition is filed. So to me, that's repetitive. And it's my suggestion that the sentence, the petition must be in a format described by a resolution adopted by the board of directors, should just end there, period. And the rest of that sentence, which says, and signed by members eligible to cast a vote, is not relevant to that particular sentence and is covered, that subject is covered two sentences later. Because that sentence, which is the second sentence of the paragraph, is simply addressing the format of the petition, not who is or is not allowed to sign it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, let's go down now where
So
each member-
407A, second sentence.
Okay,
Second sentence. That one right there, correct. I think that and signed by members eligible to cast a vote should be deleted. And it should just end with adopted by the board of directors.
Okay, the petition, it goes on, petition shall identify, blah, da, 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 da. Each member signing the petition must be eligible to vote, okay. Where do we say, all right, down below there, I got this thing in the way. Hang on a second, I'm trying to figure out where I'm at.
So the fourth sentence down says each member signing the petition must be eligible to vote when the petition is filed.
Okay, what I was looking for, and I found what I was looking for. Further on down in C, it says petitions must contain the number of signatures specified in the section. So there again, there is an explicit statement of signing the petition, and up here it says they have to be eligible to vote, and down there they said you got to have the number of signatures on the petition. I kind of wanted to tie those two things together. I agree with you. I don't see any reason why we can't modify that second sentence and end it at board of directors and drop out the and sign by. And as we've got enough, we have enough indications of signing the petition. We don't need we don't need that one up there.
Right. I agree. Since we're modifying this area anyway, I just think it's cleaning up the language a little bit, because those first two sentences are about how the petition is going to be constructed.
Right. Okay. And we say that they have to be eligible to vote when they sign it. Or it's not eligible to vote when they sign, it's when it's filed, but we say they have to be eligible to vote, and then down there, we say how many signatures have to be on it. So I think we're fine deleting that. So I'll make a note of that and include that in the proposed change for the 4.0. Do we actually have a change there after that? Because it's okay.
You've got mail.
Hey, I'm looking here at something. We really don't. Okay, well, I know what to change. We'll make that change as well into 407A as well. I'll make sure that that's in there when we come around, when I send around the updated proposal. All right, are we ready to move on to a note here before I forget it? Okay. All right, let's go on to the committee associate members as committee members. This information has come around previously, and I don't want to go through it in a whole lot of detail. The bylaws specifically state that you have to be a member eligible to vote to be on a committee. And at the past, whatever date it was, May, I think, meeting of all the committee chairs, the so-called executive council, it was proposed or suggested, I should say, that associate members be allowed to be associate members of the association, be allowed to be members of committees. And it's down in the last paragraph of that first item we're talking about, associate members, where I add a couple of comments, and that's has to do with how do we define what associate members are actually eligible to be committee or would be eligible to be committee members, because you can be an associate member for a weekend or a week or a month or a much longer period of time. Well, we have a resolution C01 in which that kind of thing could be considered or documented. I don't have any personal reason why this would not be why it would not be acceptable to have associate members on committees. The question would be, what kind of an associate member duration do you have to be in the voting, and how many terms and limits on terms and all that kind of thing, which could be in C01 if we were to put something in the bylaws that would allow this to occur. So I'm going to offer this up for discussion. One thing I will make one comment, and if we were to go something like put a provision in the bylaws permitting this kind of thing, almost certainly we would not put in there details as to what kind of associate member parameters do you have to meet to be on a committee. It would have to go probably to resolution C01 or perhaps a separate resolution which I have no interest in writing myself. And I would not encourage this committee to write such a resolution. That would be a practical consideration. Anyhow, comment on this proposal.
So
Committee, go ahead.
go ahead. No.
Well, committee members, anybody can attend any of our meetings, correct? Any committee meeting?
Certainly any member of the association, and an associate member of the association has all the rights of a member, property owner member, except the right to vote. So yes, there should be no question that an associate member of the association can show up at the committee and participate to whatever extent the committee may consider to be desirable.
So the real problem is, to be a committee member, you have to be eligible to vote, correct?
That's right. That's right.
So if the property owner isn't eligible to vote, his renter can't attend or vote, correct?
And I want to make sure I understood what you said. Say that again.
Well, if the property, to be a member of the committee, of any committee, the way the bylaws are written now, you must be a property owner and you have to be eligible to vote.
That's right.
So if you're going to extend it, that same rule would have to apply.
To what he said, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is that the associate member who may be a long-term renter, but he's not the one paying the dues and being eligible to vote. So if the original owner, the actual owner of that property, is out of compliance by not paying their dues and not eligible to vote, does that also then affect the associate member who might be on a committee? They are not allowed to vote then too, correct? That's because
they're not allowed to be on a committee.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but if we're saying yes, you can be on a committee, and we're going to give them, does that mean we're giving them full eligibility to vote in our elections and everything as well? Because
No.
why would I spend my time? Why would I want to volunteer to do committee work, but I can't vote on anything?
Let me go back to the comment Bob made. If a property owner of a member of the association whose property is in violation of not having paid the annual charge, that person cannot be a member of a committee. So if it's an actual renter situation occupying the property, that person couldn't be a member under whatever context an association member was allowed to be on a committee. That person still could be on the committee. The property would be key. The annual charge not being paid for the property means that neither the owner of the property or the renter would be eligible to be on a committee for the duration of the time that the annual charge had not been paid, at least.
Yeah.
Now, to Laura, to kind of go, I think I can remember what it was that you said. This suggestion came from the meeting of the committee chairs, which is called the Executive Council. And several of the committee chairs, there was general agreement amongst the whatever number it is, 12, 13 or so chairs were present at the meeting. It was general agreement that this would be a good idea. Let me phrase it that way. And the reason expressed was it would help in recruiting, or could help, maybe rephrase that, in recruiting committee membership. that there are people here who have some degree of commitment, rental wise, that have interest in various topics of which there is a committee, whether it's recreation and parks or maybe budget and finance or some other committee, communications, whatever, that would be interested in being committee members if they were allowed to do so. I have no way of measuring how much interest there would be among associate members for committee membership. I think the most I can say is that there was general consensus among the chairs of the committees that this would be something good to consider. And I said that, okay, we are in fact looking at bylaws now, and I will make this an item for us to consider.
Jim?
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about this quite a bit. There's some problems that I see with that approach. The biggest one to me is that we as committee members are not representing ourselves. We are representing a piece of property in Ocean Pines. So if an associate member, if a long-term renter becomes a member of a committee that makes decisions that impact Ocean Pines, it's possible that that person, that associate member, could be taking a position that's counter to what the owner of that property might take in that same situation. So I think that in our bylaws, we have a provision for property owners to sign over by proxy their vote to someone else. And I agree with the notion that there are long-term members of this community that have been here for a long time, will be here for a long time, have a vested interest and want to participate. And I think that the proper way for that to happen is for the property owners to sign over by proxy their vote to this long-term renter, because a lot of these remote property owners who have long-term renters are not participating in our process because they don't live here, and because they have a long-term renter, they don't even necessarily visit very often. So I think the way to improve involvement in the community is for these long-term renters to be allowed to participate. And I think the way to do that is by the property owner giving them their proxy vote, and then they could participate on committees, they could vote in elections, and they could be productive members of the community. And so,
with the stipulation that if they leave, then that proxy vote goes back to the homeowner.
Correct. So we already, exactly. So we already have provisions in the bylaws for how to do proxy votes. And so I think what it would be is you'd have, if an associate member had a signed proxy by the owner, that would make them eligible to participate in any committees or any other HOA business ends. And I think that's how this should be addressed. I think that's my opinion.
Well, I have one other question. While this is brought to the committee, normally our committee is not to write a policy or anything else. It's to review input from other people to look for inconsistencies within our bylaws and other governing documents, is it not? So we're stepping way beyond what our committee is charged with doing.
Well, I think in this particular example, I know what you're saying, Bob. I think what we're doing here, though, is simply saying if this was going to be a provision that the board was going to task us with considering as part of the bylaws change, we would simply be coming up with options for how it might be done. But certainly the decision for if it was done or how it would be done would not be left up to us.
I
I would
agree.
also think that having us think about it and give suggestions would take a step out of the revision part of it in one sense, because we're thinking in terms of the actual bylaws and things like that. And what Keith just said, I would have eventually probably thought about it, but you're right. The proxy voting part of it, would the board necessarily have thought about that in relation to what's already written in the bylaws? And you don't want another committee or the board to come up with, oh yes, we're going to make this, do this change. Then it comes to us and it doesn't fit in the bylaws and it's not consistent, or we find the holes in it or the problems. Why not give a foundation for them to start with, whoever will be making the final decision on whether or not it could go forward to have an associate person be on a committee with voting rights and all of that? Because I do agree, why would I put all my time and effort to join this committee if I can't vote on anything? So to me, that associate member should have the ability to vote.
Right. I think the way we handle this is that Jim adds this to our feedback to the bylaws working group as an input from the executive steering committee. Say, we received from the executive steering committee an idea, a suggestion, and this is a suggestion. We briefly looked at it. We talked about some possible ways of doing it, but then we would send that back to the bylaws working group, who's formally tasked by the board to identify shortcomings. And theoretically, if the bylaws working group comes back to us and says, no, that's not something that we should be doing, then we're off the case. If they come back and say it has merit, give us better detail or give us more options, then we would work on it.
Having said that, Keith, I agree with what you said. And Laura, if we're going to do that, the owner should give the proxy vote to that person, and then he can define whether he wants that person to represent him.
Right.
I agree with that 100%.
Okay, well, I don't have any problem with sending it back, not sending it back, but sending it to the work group for more, for consideration at their level, and I can draft something to that effect and send it around. Just one comment though, and this, we're not to the point where we're making any kind of a decision on this with regard to the proxies. I think we're extending the proxy consideration beyond what's really in the bylaws. The only consideration for proxy voting in the bylaws is if it's an issue that is before the membership at a members meeting. If there is in some manner an issue has been brought to the membership for consideration and decision by the membership at a members meeting, then there is the provision for there to be proxy voting, because consideration at the meeting would mean voting at the meeting. And for that reason, the bylaws make provision for proxy voting to accomplish that. But that's the only real specific provision in the bylaws regarding proxies. I mean, there is no proxy provision for example, for voting in a referendum or for voting for members. For members of the board of directors. Has been in the past one year, I don't think it was 2 years, but 1 year in which there was a proxy for quorum purposes at the annual meeting. Uh, but we're the comments made on proxies and what can be done with proxies for an associate member and expand their participation, if I can put it that way. I don't think it's really in the bylaws. So I don't think our proxy provisions go that far.
No, you're correct, Jim. So what I was thinking was either way, if you say an associate member can, or if you say we're going to use the proxy process, either way, you're going to have to modify the bylaws. There's going to have to be language changes. There are going to have to be some approach changes. So what I'm saying is, because you're right now, the use of the proxy is limited the way our bylaws are written. But my concern is, so you're going to have to go one. If the working group says, yeah, that's a good idea, we should try to figure out how to implement this. You're taking one of those two approaches. The thing about the proxy approach, though, is it resolves the issue of potentially having more than one vote per property. And I don't mean literal vote. I mean, if you have a long-term renter that's on a committee, formally on a committee, and is influencing the outcome of that committee, which then influences changes in the community, and then you have the owner of that property separately voting on issues and in elections, you basically have two formal voices from that property potentially making divergent decisions. So, and the only way to resolve that, to make sure that it remains one vote per property or one voice per property, is through the proxy process. That was really what my point was. But
Okay.
you're correct. As written currently in the bylaws, changes would have to be made if that were the path that we chose to go down.
Well, let me pick up on something that you said, that we've been talking now about sending back to, or not back to, but sending to the work group for some further guidance. But picking up on the, I'll call it more than one vote per property discussion. Would that not be a reason for us to say that we don't believe that this is an appropriate consideration for changes in the bylaws provision regarding committee membership for that reason in particular, and that can
Yes.
that can be
Exactly right.
that can be taken, and this is my view of that issue and how to handle that if we would go this direction. That I see that as a direction that we can, or position we can take and communicate back to the committee chairs, either at the next executive council meeting. They're supposed to be every 6 months, which would make the next one about mid-November or so. But when the next one will be scheduled is not something I can say is going to happen. But it could be communicated back that way, or it could be communicated back to the individual committee chairs, because they're all identified and all have email addresses, if that's a direction that we want to take as a position at this particular time. Laura, you were going to say something.
My question then, was this suggestion brought to the floor simply in order to gather more volunteers for committees, because we don't have to say to an associate member, you can't participate in things. You just can't be on the committee because of this. I agree with making sure that there's only one voice per property and all of that. But we can still say you can volunteer to assist with any of our activities that go on, though. Is there any reason that um, uh, I'm trying to think of an example. If they
So,
wanted to man a table at the Ocean Pines table at the farmers market to, welcome people and all of that, an associate member could volunteer to do something like that. That's not turning them away. We still want to encourage participation and that feel of community, but unless we're all willing to make all of those changes to with the wording on the proxies, the voting, all of that stuff, I still think there's a way that if for some reason there really are real true long-term renters out there who want to participate, that we can find something for them to do that um, doesn't include actually being on a committee and all of that part of it. You know what I mean? That it's that positive and negative thing. We're gonna, if we're saying that no, we're not recommending adding associate members to actual committees, for the valid reasons that we've discussed, but there's other ways that they can participate. I feel like there's still a way to come back to the community and say, if you're an associate member, we still welcome you to participate in other factors, just not on the actual committee, because you don't have voting rights.
Yeah, I agree with that. The question I would have is how is that to be communicated? Who would communicate it, and what how it would be communicated? What forum would be used to communicate that kind of thing? That's not something we can. I don't think we would want to be doing ourselves. Would it? Would it
Well,
be?
I'm just saying that you can, when we send back this to the work group or to the group that sent this suggestion to us, we can say, there may be other ways and an associate member can still feel part of the community and participate, we're not recommending that we move forward with the committee part of it. You know what I mean? Just as a suggestion, not that we're defining anything, not that we're advertising it or anything like that. Leave that up to marketing, leave that up to the people who promote the different events, like when the wall was here and, we're looking for volunteers, a long-term renter could have volunteered to help with that. To me, we just want to encourage the others to also think about there's other ways for those of us who live here can participate. It doesn't just mean committees and being a director on the board. You know what I mean? That we can verbalize that. It's
Okay.
not up to us to actually do the promoting of that.
So, and just, so I agree with what Laura just said. That can just be part of the feedback to either back to the executive steering committee or on to the working group. But just in general, just to add to what I was saying earlier, I think this idea of proxy voting and allowing us making a bylaws change that allows an owner to sign their voting right in whole over to a long-term renter, I think there's nothing but goodness that could come out of that, because we need to increase involvement in our elections, in our referendums. Look at the percentage that we got on our last bylaws back in 2008. It wasn't even 30%. There are people in the community, you can see comments on social media where they would say, well, if I could vote, I would, but I can't. So, and I would have to imagine that there are LLCs, that there's property owners and companies out there who would sign over that voting right to their long-term tenant and allow that tenant to become part of our process and to participate just as if they were an owner. So I think it's all good that could come out of encouraging participation, our little democracy that we have here. But I think it would have to be through the proxy process in order to make sure we didn't end up in a situation where we were getting double inputs, triple inputs from the same property.
Especially when two owners, two spouses in the same whole household only get one vote. You know, that wouldn't be fair either, because otherwise then we should just, everybody votes like we do in normal, regular outside elections. You know what I mean? But oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
I think the bottom line is that the idea of associate members, long-term tenants of Ocean Pines, being allowed via some method to participate more in the Ocean Pines process, I think that has merit and is worth exploring how that could be done, what ways that could be done to ensure the integrity of our votes in our election, but also to allow people to participate.
I know what I was going to say. Going along with that, do associate members have the ability and the right to participate during like town halls? You know, when the whole short-term rental thing happened, and there was a town hall, and I'm not sure, but I believe it was someone on the board said that only owners could speak. So an outside community member could not speak during that time. What is the ability of an associate member to speak during a public?
I thought all of our meetings were open to the public.
I thought so too, and I would have, but when that was all happening, it was stated during one of those open forum type meetings. I don't know I can't remember if it was called a town hall or not, but I do remember hearing there was a realtor who wanted to make a comment about it and was not allowed because they don't actually own property.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I think the issue there was that person didn't even live in Ocean Pines.
Right.
Because
so,
what they ask you for, what is the address you're speaking on behalf of today?
Right.
And so if your answer is, I don't live in Ocean Pines, well, I don't know, because still, I think that aren't the meetings open to the public? So theoretically, can't anybody say anything?
I would have said yes, even though they weren't, because if it's a public meeting, anybody should be allowed. But in that same vein, then too, is the associate member able then to comment with that address and state, you know, are they giving the opinion, their opinion, or the owner's opinion, you know? So I don't know.
I thought the collection of,
I think we're going to do this, and we're going to have to update it in the bylaws. It should be done in this whole process before we ever get to the point where we're ready to send out the referendum for this, instead of fixing everything that we have been working on, and then 2 months later the board or whoever says, yes, let's add this provision. We go in, clarify the proxy voting part and all that. That's another change to the bylaws that we got to go back to people for. So
good point. That's
we
a
need
good point.
to make sure it's all part of the whole package this time around. And then, you know, if we got to keep going back as a referendum, though, to get it approved, we can't afford, or we shouldn't have to afford, multiple times to do this in the same fiscal year, you know?
Yeah. I just believe that if we're going to allow associate members to be part of committees, that the owner should waive his rights or appoint him as designated representative, and then he can do it for the purpose of that committee and not for any other voting rights, but a designated representative might be the way to get around it. I'm asking him to represent me and vote for me at committee meetings. But I think then there's some ownership, and because why would you want to be on a committee if you have no vote?
Right, exactly.
Okay. A direction we appear to be going, let me phrase it that way, is to go back to the bylaws work group and expand beyond this narrow consideration of associate members on committees and expand that into or build on, if I can put it that way, the thinking behind this at the meeting of the committee chairs was to expand the opportunities for people to be on committees, to expand the opportunity to recruit people to be on committees, expand beyond that, go back to the work group in an expanded concept of how to enlarge or extend to the participation of additional residents within the community. And it could amend, what goes back to the work group could go into the idea of how a owner member could pass on to a resident of their property the voting rights of the property. Proxy, for example, expanding the use of proxies to be able to extend to associate members' participation on committees, actually voting in referendums and board elections on behalf of the property. Am I understanding correctly that we are going in that direction, going to the work group with this committee idea or suggestion from the chairs, going to the work group with that as a background, but saying, going into, would there be consideration, or should there be consideration, or somehow how to express that, of expanding the opportunity for those who are resident within the association and already associate members to be able to extend further and act as the member would act for the property. I kind of rattled along there, but in my head, do you understand what I'm trying to say? And am I headed in the right direction?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, the other side of that is we would not now be going back to the executive council, the committee chairs, and say, we're not going to go that way. We don't need to communicate anything right now. But that would be the other side of this. We're not going that direction. We're going to go the direction to the work group for them to give us direction on whether to consider or not consider some expansion of the ability, or an expansion of the bylaws to give an ability to associate members to act for the property. That's best words I'm coming up with right now, but not necessarily the final words. That's the direction we're going to go.
Agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me try to put that down in some kind of semblance of words and circulate that around as well. And before anything gets sent back to the work group, I'll compose something and get it in circulation as soon as I can.
Okay.
All right, let's go on, if we can, to the second item on this additional proposals to consider. Here again, this is from a member of the association. And the concern expressed is that the provision in the bylaws, which is in 512A, I think in particular is 512A4, it's too difficult for the membership to be able to remove a director from the director position. Uh, the material that was previously sent around has three elements to it. One is what the current bylaws say about removal of a member by the membership. It also has a comment about, or a summary really, of what the prior bylaws said. That's the ones that, were in existence prior to 2008. And then there's a brief summary of what the Maryland Code says about removal of directors. Just a couple of points in there. The pre-2008 bylaws allowed members to remove a director for cause by a 2/3 vote of those eligible to cast a vote. Now, that's not a majority of the votes returned. It's a majority. It's a 2/3 vote of those who were eligible to cast a vote, or in other words, eligible to vote. The current bylaws do not mention cause, removal for cause, but they do have a provision that says, looking for it here, it's not with cause is not stated, but the petition that would result in the vote to remove has to state a basis for the removal. And I have difficulty believing that that could be interpreted other than stating a cause for removal. So I have difficulty. I don't know why they put in basis rather than they took out with cause and replaced a basis. There's no explanation of material in the materials that went out with that referendum as to why that change was made. But I have to personally have to understand that basis and with cause are the same thing. Well, from the pre-2008 to the current bylaws, we did in fact reduce or make it easier or less or more possible, if I can put it that way, to remove a director. Previously, it would have been like 67% of the vote was required to remove the director. Now it's a majority or 50% plus one vote, which is another 16, 17% fewer votes required to remove a director. So we've already made a step in the direction of making it easier. The other is that the charter doesn't say anything. The code essentially is the same as our current bylaws, where it says a majority of the votes that can be cast for a director. Well, the majority that can be cast is the same as basically the same as our eligible to vote requirement. However, the code says with or without cause. We only have what amounts to with cause. And I'm making more comments here than I intended to make, but the provision in this non-stock portion of the corporations and associations article has a provision where the basis is located for us to be able to have a members remove provision differing from the general corporate law provision, which is the majority of votes. That's where you would look to for a basis for changing our current provision. And I have difficulty personally seeing a good basis for making a change different than what we have now. What we have now is mostly the same thing that's in the corporation's code provision, and and we've reduced it once when the bylaws were revised in 2008. I personally don't see a good argument for making a change.
Okay, so my question would be then, we received this concern from somebody in the association who thinks that the way things are currently written, it does not make it feasible or able to be able to remove a director, right, from by the association. So there's two things to consider on for me then is one, do we even feel that this concern is valid? If the answer, so I guess it's a twofold thing. Do we feel it's a valid concern in how it's written? If so, what would we recommend on how it could be cleaned up or made clearer or better or whatever? Or are we going to go back and respond to this person and say, the committee feels that the way things are currently read, who gets the final decision to tell this person the final status of how we're going to move forward on it? Are we moving forward to actually take in consideration and try to reword things, or do we feel that it is written well enough as is? Do we have the ability as a committee to say it doesn't need to be updated and looked at now? Or is that something from the work group or the board? Where on that, if you get a request like this from a member, what's the next step in how to resolve it? Because you can't just ignore them. You have to be able to go back and say, thank you for your input. Here's how we're moving forward with this, and acknowledge it.
Well, I want to just one brief comment, and then I want to make sure Keith and Bob have an opportunity to say something. The expressed concern is it's impossible to get enough votes to remove a director. Now, I'm trying to figure out what to say next, because the next thing I was going to say gets into the details of how you would change it, and that's not. I don't want to go there right now.
Well, Jim, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
So in your write-up, you said that per Maryland code, certain types of HOAs have to do majority of votes cast. But then you said if it's a different kind of HOA that's, I don't know, something about stockholders, I really didn't understand it.
Well, okay, let me.
Then that would mean that we could change it to something else. We could set a limit. So could you just talk about that for a minute? Because which of those scenarios are we?
Okay, there are two parts of the corporation's article. And when I say two parts, I don't mean Part A and Part B or Section 1, Section 2. There's what's called general corporate law, and then there's another section within the corporation's article that deals with special corporations. And there are I don't know, half a dozen or so special corporations. Among them are electrical cooperatives. I think there's agricultural cooperatives is another one. And without trying to, by memory, list them, there is also a non-stock corporations section. And we are a non-stock corporation. And there are about 7 or 8 items listed in the non-stock corporations section, in which a non-stock corporation can modify something that is in general corporations law in the non-stock corporations charter or its bylaws. And an easy example is quorum. In general corporate law, and this would be stock corporation, a quorum of members is a majority of the membership that's able to vote at the meeting. We've modified, we are authorized as a non-stock corporation to change that. And we've changed it to 100 members out of 8,250 plus or minus members of the association. We only have to have 100 at a meeting to have a quorum. Another item is that we can prescribe the terms and length of terms and the conditions of tenure. And I'm summarizing what the actual provision is, but that would be where we have the authority to remove a director. The membership, that's where we can put in there our provision for removing a director by the membership of the association, instead of it having to be a majority of the votes that can be cast for the director. We did previously have it at 2/3, not a majority. We had more votes were required. Now it's been taken back to effectively a majority. So that's how that's the reason why we can pick up any reasonable provision, that's my term, reasonable provision for removal. And it could be different from what's called out for in the general corporate law provisions.
Okay, so the bottom line is we, Ocean Pines, could change this language to something less. You said we've already done it once. So in other words, it's a reality that we could make this change.
Yes, I misstated something. I said condition, the tenure. The term is actually, we can modify the conditions of service of the directors. And to have to have cause, for example. Again, I'm considering the term a basis in the petition, saying a basis for removal to be cause. We can specify the conditions of service of a director, and it's that phrase, that provision that allows us to put in what we want as far as removal of a director by members.
So here's my 2 cents. And this, the basically what the conclusion we come to on this would then go back to Lori's initial question of how do we provide feedback on this? But the language, majority of the total votes that could be cast, is the most restrictive voting requirement we have in our bylaws. We don't even require that for a referendum. Our current language for a referendum is a majority of the total votes cast, not that could be cast. So it's a valid argument to say that we in our bylaws have set this up to be the hardest vote to take. And we know, based on the history of Ocean Pines, that we very rarely get to 50% or over 50% participation in elections or votes. The average voting participation for board of directors is 40%. So I think it's a valid argument for somebody to say that the language in here has made it nearly impossible to get rid of a director. So just my 2 cents is, I don't think this language is appropriate. I think it should be something more in line with either a referendum at a minimum, or the same level of participation we typically get in a board of directors vote, which is around 40%. So my feeling is that the majority of total votes cast doesn't exist as a requirement anywhere else in there, and I don't think it should exist here either.
Okay, Bob and Laura.
I'm thinking because this is something the board is going to have to decide whether they even want it on a referendum or they want to change the bylaw. So it goes back to the board of directors as to what do they want to do.
Well, it would be
if they-
feedback back to the working group, right? That this was an input we received, we talked about it, and it would have to go back to the work group to decide if they wanted to move forward with it.
Yeah, if they're going to move forward with the supermajority, they could use the same supermajority for this as a referendum, and then there'd be no need to change it. Other than, I mean, to make it consistent with what you're going to do for a referendum that isn't held as part of the normal meeting, period.
Right, right.
So that's probably the easiest approach to take. It should be consistent.
Right. Mhm.
Well,
You don't want to make this whole process so super easy that anytime a small group of people feels that they're unhappy with a director, oh, we can just remove them if we go about this manner. It really needs to be a legitimate reason, a legitimate cause for even starting this process. It should be, truthfully, the last thing we do with a director. It shouldn't be something that's the easiest thing that we as a community can do. Otherwise, that's going to be a very subjective thing that happens anytime and every time, because just because of the beast of the way politics happens to be. There will always be somebody that if they see something they're not happy with, we're going to change it, right? You know, and it may not align with everybody else, you know, so we can't make it so easy that it's going to be done every couple of years that somebody is upset with the directors, you know. And truthfully, to me, you all know that I'm a PTA person. That is the last thing we want to do, is have to remove an officer. It's really got to be a just cause, you know, to do it, and we have a whole process to do it. But it's our last option that we take, and it really should be conveyed, in my opinion, that this isn't something that I'm not saying that we shouldn't reevaluate how it's worded, how the process is worded. That can be looked at, but I'm also saying we need to take in consideration any changes that are made. Are you now making it too easy to remove a director versus we don't want either extreme? So hard that you can never get enough votes to remove legitimately someone, but we also don't want to make it so easy that now everybody's being removed just because X amount of people said they didn't like their vote or whatever. You know what I mean?
I
agree
agree.
with that.
Yeah, I would add to that our provision varies from the Maryland Code provision only in the instance in which the code provision permits a without cause removal as being the basis. What you would define as without cause, that's a completely different story. I don't know that we would want to add without cause back into our provision, regardless of how we're going. But again, we're not that far out of line with what the actual Maryland Code provision is right now. And I say that in conjunction with what Laura just said about making it too easy.
So I think we could recommend that we're going to send this to the work group, correct? And say, yes, you can look at, you know, we recommend looking at the wording on this to take in consideration this request. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, anything is actually going to change. It just means that we are willing to keep moving it in the proper direction, right?
Yeah,
to continue the discussion on it.
I would agree that if the super majority recommendation we made is an appropriate recommendation, then this should follow suit with it and be exactly the same. The majority should decide, not a minority, as to who gets removed.
The recommendation we made on the, again, call it super majority, I'm not sure how that would fit with a director removal. That may be kind of a problematic kind of thing.
I think we send this back to the work group as part of our feedback. This was just like the other issue. This is an issue that was received for consideration. We took a look at it. Potentially there's merit to this, but we refer back to the work group as if this is something that they want to tackle as part of this project.
Okay, that's fine with me. Any other comment on that? Doing it that way.
I agree.
All right. Well, that's item number 2. Item number 2 on my work group. work group Missy for this particular item. Okay, we're right at or a little bit beyond our 2 hours, but we only have one more item. So let's move on to that. That's the third item on this list of additional items. Josh, can you scroll down a little bit if we still have you?
Yep, 1 second.
Okay. All right. This is from me personally, okay? And my concern is I wanted to kind of close the loop on some things when it comes to petitions. And unfortunately, Camille, I had to leave before we got there or got to this because it involves the secretary. What I am proposing is we're back to paragraph 407A now. There is the last sentence I would modify as it is shown here. And I'm not sure that the modification comes through as much as I wanted it to.
It does. I can see it.
Okay. Looking for one item. All right. What this is, the way it reads now, it just says that the secretary shall certify that the petition meets the requirements of this section. But it doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything other than to certify. Okay, certified in what manner? Well, I'm suggesting to put in there certify in writing to the board of directors.
I agree.
Now, let me, then you have to add to that what comes next, or not next, the following. There's a provision in 514L that the board of directors shall consider a petition submitted under section 407 at a meeting. I guess probably should say, I don't know if it's, 407, doesn't have to say alpha, bravo, whatever. The board of directors shall consider a petition submitted under 407 and certified by the secretary as valid by the secretary at a meeting of the board within 60 days.
I agree.
And without the and certified, you don't tie the two provisions together. And I'm just trying to close the loop on what the secretary is supposed to do. That's my intention here.
I agree with both those.
To be perhaps a little bit, I held back from going into any more detail than this. In particular, or file a public report with the board. I dropped board of directors. I dropped of directors out of that as unnecessary. to file a public report with the board specifying the basis for rejecting the petition. Now, the last petition, there was never a public report filed with the board. The attorney sent a letter to the, I'm not sure now whether it's to the board of directors or to the president of the board, outlining why the petition should be rejected. And the next day, this board put out a statement. And then that was the extent of a public report. And it didn't come from the secretary, it came from virtually the attorney. I'm just trying to close the loop on this, that it's a little bit more clear as to what we do with petitions. So anyway, it sounded like everybody's in agreement with going with this as a proposal.
Yep.
Okay,
Yes,
now
great.
this also should really go back to the work group, because it's not something that came from them.
Agree.
Okay.
Great.
We're keeping the work group busy.
Go ahead, Laura.
I said, we're keeping the work group busy.
Well, all right. We're at the end of the agenda. I got some things I got to put together and get back for circulation. I'm also going to start looking at, we're literally through everything that we've had before us, whether it's the work group, from the work group, or other miscellaneous, I'll call it, that we've considered outside of the work group. I'm going to look at what we really need to do next to put this into a package and get it to the work group, as we discussed earlier, so that the work group will have a package in front of it to consider as a package, not piecemeal, and be able to figure out how to do it within the considerable items for the board members' attention, whether it be a work group or the board itself. And I'll start working on what we got to do to do that as well. All right, anybody got anything further we want to talk about? Other than it's Friday afternoon before a 3-day holiday.
And just confirming that our next meeting is the Friday, the 17th, right?
That's it.
Okay.
All right, you folks, I'll be in communication as soon as I can on this stuff, and everybody have a good weekend, good evening.
Okay, same deal.
All right.